Elon Musk worked very, very hard to get Donald Trump elected. He was given $1 million check out to people who were pre-vetted by his America PAC for registering to vote. He was running full canvassing operations for the Trump campaign in certain states where the Trump campaign had basically little to zero ground game, and it was all Elon Musk's America PAC paying people to go out and canvass in neighborhoods to try to get them out for Donald Trump and Republican candidates. And Elon himself contributed quite large financial sums to pro-Trump advertising and allowed Trump's advertising to take over the platform, while also constantly pumping him up on X after getting the staff at Twitter to algorithmically manipulate the system to make his tweets more visible for everybody. You ever wonder why every other tweet you see on Twitter is Elon's? Yeah, that's by design. After Biden outperformed him during a football match when he was shouting out a football team, he got angry enough about it that he had a meeting with Twitter staff to change the algorithm to benefit his posts more. And as we've seen this call for political neutrality to save Twitter from Elon Musk being turned into $22 billion losses in evaluation and their evaluated price of Twitter, cutting it in half while plastering the whole thing with political messages. To me, it feels like Elon has not only striven off the course from the politically neutral pitch that he made for why Twitter needed to be taken over, but he's gone off the path of political neutrality, jumped on the Trump train, and then tipped the driver. He tipped the train conductor. And so now the election's over. Trump won. He won by about 4 million votes in the popular vote. It's still counting. Might shrink, might expand a little bit. And he won by over 300 electoral college votes by winning Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, of course, Ohio. He won every swing state that you could care to mention, really. And so now, here we are, on the other side of that. What's the end game for Elon? What's the end game for the richest man on the planet? Well, currently, Elon Musk is sitting in on high-profile phone calls between Donald Trump and foreign leaders. And not only is he sitting in on these phone calls, he's also weighing in while spending quite a lot of his time at Mar-a-Lago leading up to Trump's inauguration, hanging out with the president and pitching him different ideas after he joined the president's war room several months from the completion of the campaign. So he transitioned from Trump's election war room to now Mar-a-Lago, where he's speculating and weighing in and giving advice on who Trump should pick for his cabinet appointments, while also sitting in on calls with foreign leaders. And that sitting in on calls with foreign leaders, that's not a thing that happens. That's not a normal thing. He sat in on the call with the Serbian president. He sat in on a call with Erdogan, the president of Turkey, and he sat in on a call with Zelensky that lasted about 20-25 minutes. Mind you, Elon Musk is not an expert on Turkish history or American-Turkish relations, on American-Serbian relations. He's not going in there like, okay, I got some new hot takes on the Chinese embassy bombings. No. And he's certainly not an expert on Ukrainian history or the Russo-Ukrainian war, which is going to be the first major crisis of Trump's administration. He said he was going to end the war within 24 hours. He set a timetable on himself. He put himself under pressure. He gave that leverage to the other side, and he has a short timetable to find a solution, going up to Election Day and immediately following it. Now, he could, of course, bust out of that timetable in any number of ways, but that's the timetable he set for himself, and in these important first calls, Elon Musk is there. Not only weighing in on the issues, weighing in on staffing decisions, but sitting on calls with foreign leaders. Why? Why? Why is the richest man on the planet sitting in on phone calls between Trump and foreign leaders? Why is the richest man on the planet lounging around Mar-a-Lago giving all these recommendations on staffing decisions? Why is the richest man on the planet this to the hip with the future president of the United States? I don't think that Elon is passively observing. I think Elon wants to be actively involved. In fact, Donald Trump said Elon would help him deregulate American industry, getting the richest man on the planet with clear interests, clear financial stakes, to be the one that deregulates the federal government. What could go wrong? But it's not stopped there. It's now spreading to other cabinet picks and foreign policy. This is the type of oligarchic nightmare that we hear about described to me and described to you, but oh, that's how they do it over there in Ukraine, and that's why we can't send aid to Ukraine, because they're so corrupt over there, because all the oligarchs and the corruption. They come back at home, and he's sitting in on the phone calls after running the canvassing operation for them, after doing the $1 million scam. And I call it a scam because they said it was a raffle, but then they had to admit that it wasn't a raffle because of legal trouble that could come with it being a raffle, and had to admit that they were pre-screening the people that were getting awarded $1 million. And he does all this work for Trump, and now he's sitting in on all these important decisions. He's sitting in on these important calls. And look, I would be upset no matter who it was, but the fact that it's this billionaire who's not only ignorant of the issues that he's sitting in on and ignorant of the countries that he's involving himself in the diplomacy of, but somebody who's so confident in their ignorance. So confident in their ignorance. Elon Musk talked about how the cities and villages that support Ukraine will resist harder, and that'll kind of make the dividing line in the sand in Ukraine, because the cities and villages that resist harder will stop the Russians. They won't be able to take them because they support Ukraine. And the ones that resist not as hard will be the Russian ones because all the locals are in favor of the attack, etc. It's completely devoid, completely separated from the reality on the war. There's like 5 babushkas in a lot of these villages. And all they're doing is living in dusty cellars, trying to survive on whatever aid shipments the crazy aid workers that were still bringing them support till the bitter end were able to get to them. They're not taking up machine guns and resisting against the invading army. Or him saying like, oh, if you voted for Yanukovych, well, then you wanted to be part of Russia. You voted for a pro-Russian president, therefore you want to be Russian. On its face, that's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense, especially if you know how Yanukovych engaged in politics. Now, a lot of these Ukrainian politicians engage in politics in a clientelist way. So that doesn't make much sense. I didn't take much from that. I believe his peace deal was bogus. I believe what he based it in was bogus. I think it was also naive when he talks about a UN like organized vote in the territories that Russia wants to add. Whose soldiers are gonna be around there? Are the Russians gonna withdraw their troops to allow UN troops to control how the vote is done? No, it's naive. And so for me, I feel like I'm in the same position as those divers who tried to, I'm not saying I'm, like the divers, but those people who were watching Elon argue with those divers who wanted to save those kids who were trapped in that cave in Asia, where Elon was injecting himself into the situation to make himself the hero, saying, I'll go in and I'll build the submarine and I'll save the kids with my super Tesla submarine. And then the divers say, no, you're not going to be able to get it through the tight angles of these underwater caves. It just won't work. And his response was to lash out, was to call the divers kitty diddlers for no reason. For no reason. And so I feel like right now, like, not only does Ukraine have to deal with the fact that this guy's going to be spinning horse hockey near the presidency, but he's now spinning it in these calls with Zelensky close to the administration, and they're going to have to some extent, submit themselves
Burns is a
to Elon's
immoral,
ego.
morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
Zelensky and his staff and anybody who works with them, if Elon is staying in this position close to Trump at the hip to help him not only with this deregulation campaign, and again, the richest man in the world being given discretion to deregulate the U.S. economy, I don't necessarily think that's a great idea. I don't necessarily think that's a brave populist idea that stands for the working man. The union busting Elon with the litany of labor complaints against him and his facilities being the one to manage the U.S. economy. But now we're going to have to get the Ukrainians not only to have to suck up to Trump to try to get, his national security advisors and Secretary of State to convince him that if the Russians offer a bad deal, that it's worth it to double down on Ukraine support, and they're going to have to brown nose him. But now they're possibly going to have to brown nose Elon as well. Elon, who said that Ukraine ever even having Crimea was a mistake. That Elon. The Elon who cut off Starlink once he discovered that it was going to be used for an attack on the Russian Navy based in Sevastopol. And he stopped it because he was scared after conversations with Putin that we don't really know exactly all the details of, because not only was Trump having phone calls with Putin while he was not in office, 7, according to Bob Woodward, but also Elon was having calls, according to Ian Bremmer, others, and recent reporting, which redoubled the attention to it. That man is going to have to be brown-nosed. That man. After everything he said about Crimea, about the cutting off, the cutting off of the Starlink during the operation there, which he said was, maybe World War III. Then they hit Crimea. World War III never happened. Who would have thought it was a bluff and Elon got played by a bluff? He certainly wouldn't get played again. But no, he is. He is going to get played again. Because if Elon is there, Elon is going to be tricked. I really do think so. I think basically, Elon is going to be played. Look at this. Look at this message from David Sachs. The most underreported story in Washington is how much corrupt Ukrainian cash is trying to buy influence. It wasn't just Hunter Biden. Most of the warmongers are paid. Then Elon responds, yeah. How would Elon even know this? Let's for a second say that it's true, that there is a bunch of corrupt Ukrainian cash flowing through Washington, going into the back pockets of people that we don't know about. How would Elon even know this? Elon certainly isn't that popular right now in pro-Ukraine circles. Elon has, if he was asked, like, I'm going to give you this much money to support Ukraine, he would be the first person to go on Twitter and tweet about it. Or I guess X about it. What do you say? It's an X. What do you do with it? If it's Twitter, you tweet. If it's X, you exfoliate? I don't know. But he would go and he would message about it. He would say something. He would provide that evidence. And he'd be excited to be able to provide that evidence. So I don't think Elon has any evidence, any photographs, any documents, any money transfers. So where is he getting this? And for David Sachs, where's David Sachs getting this? He doesn't run in these circles. And if it's an underreported, the most underreported story in Washington, out of all the stories, you could talk about the transparency laws that were changed on drone strikes. You could talk about all sorts of different lobbying efforts and much more influential lobbies than the Ukraine lobby. You could talk about any number, the homelessness issue in Washington, D.C., if we want to talk about the city itself. Or, for example, the problem with the different health wards and the medical services to those people if we want to stay local. You could talk about, there's any number of stories that are underreported in Washington. And yours is the corrupt Ukrainian cash. And even though it's an underreported story, David Sachs is not going to provide any evidence of it. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world with a million different contacts, he isn't going to provide any evidence of it. It's just a bunch of hearsay. But that hearsay, from the mouth of someone like David Sachs, has an impact in my mind on Elon Musk. I think that Elon believes that his ability to tell fact from fiction is strong enough that he can use this platform like a newsreel. And instead of looking at everything like to be determined or to be confirmed, I mean, it's not like he hasn't retweeted complete hogwash before. Elon Musk promoted a story on X saying that the guy who tried to beat Nancy Pelosi's husband to death with a hammer was actually his secret gay lover, and it was a lover's quarrel. So it's like Elon can fall for this stuff quite easily. And that was like a simple disinformation operation from a tiny little like gnat outlet. When you talk about people like David Sachs, people that you can trust, basing it on hearsay with nothing you can like tightly grip, that scares me. And I think Elon Musk is malleable. Maybe not as malleable as Trump. Hell, maybe even more malleable than Trump, but who knows? But like, this is the type of stuff that's going to be showing up in Elon's feed if he's advising the President of the United States what to do about Ukraine. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban recounts his extraordinary meeting with himself and Zelensky. Orban, please, my friend, time is not on your side. I'm ready to help you. I'm ready to facilitate a ceasefire and to help achieve acceptable peace. Zelensky, Viktor, I have a different opinion. Time is on our side. Orban, thank you, President. My mission is complete. Orban knows Zelensky is delusional and agreement incapable. Why waste time on such a person? This was 4 days after the election. It's been 4 days. Trump and Zelensky has had one phone call that we've had no indication went bad. Zelensky even said it went okay. And you're immediately like, wait, Viktor Orban told a story where he tried to bring peace and Zelensky said, nah, buddy. He's just incapable of deal making. Incapable of agreements. This is just fear-mongering. And plus, you're just taking Viktor Orban at his word. He has a media empire built on lies. Do you know there was a conference held in Budapest, held in Hungary, that Zelensky was at, and they were broadcasting all of this conference that Viktor Orban was trying to play up his diplomacy on for the domestic audience, because his polling domestically right now was really, really bad. And they were playing all these speeches. You want to know the one speech they didn't include that they cut out? It was Zelensky's speech. Viktor Orban does not want to play on a level playing field with the rest of the world and with the rest of Europe or with the Ukrainians when it comes to the media reporting and the facts of the matter. And so instead, he's gotten large control of the media, and he determines what they do cover and what they don't cover and make sure it's slanted in his direction. Moving on to another post from him. The smart people know the Ukraine war is a grift and they are in on it. The dumb people think it's about democracy, even though the vast majority of Crimea and Donbass are ethnic Russians and want to go to Russia. The U.S. has been fighting democracy in Ukraine. We're the ones fighting democracy. But by giving guns to the Ukrainians, we're fighting against the Russian liberators, bringing democracy and freedom and the Second Amendment and anti-wokeness and Jordan Peterson novels and civilization itself. And civilization itself to the Ukraine, the poor, destitute, illiterate Ukrainians are being civilized by the mighty Ruski Mir. Get the fuck out of here, you loser. Get out. Come on, really? It's a grift. Number one, people can care about the war. The majority of Americans support Ukraine. The majority of the West support Ukraine. There's millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people who support Ukraine. Is it really that hard for you to imagine that of all those people, some of them might believe in it enough to go give their money, time, effort, or, career, years of their life for it? Why does it have to be a grift? Everyone knows it's a grift. The smart people do. David Sachs has never been to Ukraine. David Sachs will probably never go to Ukraine. David Sachs doesn't know really all that much about Ukraine. Who are these smart people that he's talking about? Because the people who come here and see the war do not walk away thinking, oh, all the people of the Donbass want to be part of Russia. All the people of Eastern Ukraine, they're actually all like ethnic Russians and they speak Russian. They all want to be Russian. Azov was a Russian-speaking organization. If you go to the Donbass and the militias that have been fighting for years, Most of them are Russian speaking. My fixer is a displaced refugee from Donetsk. He is as conservative as you can get. He is as Christian as you can get. I've never heard him speak a lick of Ukrainian. And he despises the Russians with a burning passion. Do you want to know why? Because he's a Ukrainian Protestant who is getting persecuted with many other Ukrainian Protestants in occupied territory. And so they flee. And he's not the only one. He's not the only one who have gotten on the bad stick of the Russian authorities. Religious minorities, political minorities, those who critique government corruption, those who critique government brutality, those who get on the bad side of the Russian Orthodox Army or Rusich or any of these thuggish militias. People who believe in freedom of expression, of a free press, of a flourishing civil society. Those who might be tied to the Ukrainian identity, because he might not know this, David Sachs, but you go in the rural areas of the Donetsk region, there's actually quite a few Ukrainian speakers in some of those villages. There is. You know, Ukrainian language doesn't just fade away as you go east. A lot of it had to do with the fact of people dying during famines. Then they move in Russian speakers, and many of the people that even moved in don't want to be part of Russia. There was never any polling clearly indicating that the majority of people in the Donetsk or the Luhansk regions wanted to be part of Russia. When the rebels threw out the Ukrainian authorities and there was a war in eastern Ukraine, the rebels were losing. They were losing the war in 2014. They were losing the war in 2015. They were going to get crushed and they were going to get completely pushed out of the Donbass. It was only when the Russians infused them with more guns, more arms, more money, but most importantly, direct Russian military support, that they were able to stabilize the situation and turn it around. So this picture he paints is so black and white. It is so, this is dumb. It's, they speak Russian, therefore they want to be part of Russia. It's not that simple. We all know people who are Irish. How many of them speak Irish? If they don't speak Irish, do you think they want to be British? Do you think they want to be English? It's really that simple. Human beings are more complex than the tongue they speak. But this is the type of nonsense that they're going to be shoveling into his ear, shoveling into his eye holes, as he's trying to advise Donald Trump. Never forget that a draft peace deal for the Ukraine war was negotiated and signed in its first month. The Ukrainian delegation even popped champagne to celebrate. Then Biden, Nuland, and the neocons rejected it. What the fuck is he even talking about? What's this? When did this happen? Nuland rejected it? How would Nuland have the authority to reject it? Biden rejected it? Was it I thought it was Boris Johnson was the story. Was it not Boris? It was Biden and Nuland? They rejected. How did they reject it? Did they have the authority to reject it? At the end of the day, it's the Ukrainians first who get to negotiate it. Now hundreds of thousands of people are dead, more wounded, pure evil. What's often left out of this, by the way, when they talk about that peace deal, the peace deal included the demilitarization of Ukraine. It included Ukraine giving up land. It included Ukraine declaring neutrality, meaning it could not join any defensive agreements that would defend it if it was invaded again. It would mean enshrining Russian cultural policy within Ukraine. That meaning like giving the Russian language protected status and stuff like that. And it's demilitarization. Meaning that if they got invaded again, they'd have no allies, they'd have no soldiers, they'd have no artillery guns and tanks to confront the invading army. After the Russians lied about invading them twice in a row within 10 years. This is the type of stuff, when I hear stuff like this, that makes me question, who are you serving? Who are your interests? Who do you answer to? Because anyone that is engaging with this on good faith and knows what those deals entailed. And even though this guy, who I don't respect at all, and I'm not going to get into it right now. Has he blocked me? I don't think he's blocked me. Or I think he did, and now I can see it because, whatever, it doesn't matter. Twitter changed its policies on blocked. Even in this thread of Arestovich, and I hate that every single time there's this scandal of like the truth gets revealed. I click and it's like we finally got the truth on the pro-Ukraine people. And every single time it's Oleksiy Arestovich spinning some crazy tale, one of Zelensky's old advisors, not very liked by the way, for good reason. either way, in that thread, it says that things they had not resolved included Ukraine's military after the war. He doesn't go into detail, but those details was whether Ukraine would have one or not. Whether they would have an army that'd be substantive to resist the Russian invasion, or they would have one that was so small that it could get crushed within the 24-hour to 3-day time period the Russians originally wanted. If you include that the robber who invaded is asking you to get rid of your guns if he's going to leave and totally promise not to come back, that changes the dynamic quite a bit. But this information is not included. Of course it's not included. But let me just say, it's not just Elon who could be whispering in the ear of the President of the United States on Ukraine policy, on Israel policy, on policy to do with any number of foreign policy issues. It's also possibly the worst options. And when I say like the worst, I mean the worst. Listen to this. This is from the American Conservative. The American Conservative can confirm that President-elect Donald Trump's search for Secretary of State has narrowed to 4 candidates. Rick Grenell. He's the former ambassador to Germany, who's seen as somebody who's a lot more hostile towards the Europeans, specifically the Germans, and like trying to get concessions. Hostile in the idea that he's super uber aggressive and uncouth. But like, I mean, depending on your perspective, there's be a reason not to care about that. Marco Rubio, the Florida senator and runner-up to be Trump's vice president. Bill Hagerty, the Tennessee senator and his former ambassador to Japan. And Vivek Ramaswamy, the former presidential candidate turned fierce Trump surrogate. Now, we have a segment on Bill Hagerty we might watch a little bit later today. He's much like the rest of the Republican Party sliding into forever war, do we really want to keep shoveling all this to Ukraine policy? Marco Rubio is starting to sound a lot like that too, but I mean, his roots are, I think, a lot more, I think his defense thoughts or his thoughts on IR is still more centered towards Euro-Atlantism than Trump would generally be. And so him being in there probably would not be necessarily the worst for Ukraine, but he's not going to stick out his neck for Ukraine, I don't think. Richard Grenell, I think, is not the worst option, but I don't think he's a better option. Vivek Ramaswamy, I can't think of any justification that man should have any position within the United States government, period. But of all the positions, to have one of the most important and most powerful positions, Secretary of State, to be helping to design and implement foreign policy for the president of the most powerful country on the planet. And we're going to give it to this guy? Why? What did this dude ever do in the pharmaceutical industry that has anything to do with foreign policy? He never negotiated a treaty. He's never negotiated with foreign leaders or foreign diplomats. He's not trained in IR. Not trained in IR. He never went to an IR class. He doesn't know anything really about foreign policy. He's not a diplomat. He's not a statesman. He's not an ambassador. He doesn't have any experience in these fields. He is a businessman who ran a media-savvy campaign for his club, for the Republican base, for 6 months, and was able to wiggle himself into the Trump circle, largely through flattery, and being a salesman. And now he sold himself all the way up to this position. This is one of the most important positions in the entirety of the government, is Secretary of State. I don't think he's going to get it. I think odds are, if somebody with a brain cell in the administration hears that he's about to put Vivek Ramaswamy as Secretary of State, someone's going to tell him, hold it. Hold the brakes. Why not Richard? Why not Marco? Why not Hagerty? Why are you going with the guy with zero foreign policy experience, who's never voted on foreign policy issues? He's never, in Congress. He's never been in Congress. He's never served as a diplomat. He's never done any of this work ever. Why are you going to choose him to devise a president with only 4 years of experience, no more, as a statesman or a public official? We're stacking inexperience on top of inexperience on top of inexperience. We have a president with 4 years of experience. And when we say experience, the experience you have is the experience you work on. Like, if I am president of the United States and I don't do anything, as Trump did, to make deals with the opposition that are bipartisan, You have 4 years of experience. You don't have 4 years of experience legislating, passing laws, or making hard compromises or deal making, like Trump likes to say. So you have 4 years of Trump's experience. Take that into consideration. No more as a statesman, no more as a public official. You stack that on top of J.D. Vance, one heartbeat away from the presidency. He has half a term of experience. And when I say, I mean like half a term. He beat Tim Ryan, and then he became president of the United States. He beat Tim Ryan to become senator from Ohio, and then became vice president of the United States after trashing Trump just 4 or 5 years before as heroin for America. And he said that as somebody from Ohio. And when you talk about opioids as somebody from Ohio, that's quite a condemnation. So we have Trump's inexperience stacked on top of Vance's inexperience, and then we're going to put Vivek as Secretary of State, who has zero experience. I mean, we can talk about J.D. Vance not passing laws because he hasn't been in the office long enough. Vivek Ramaswamy hasn't even sniffed the paper that the laws are written on. This guy will get played on the foreign policy scene if he is representing the United States in negotiations. Just because you're a businessman does not mean that you necessarily know what's at the best interest of your country outside of necessarily yourself. America is not a conglomerate. America is a country that needs to seek not only the business interests of its nation, but also the interests of the healthcare of its people, the health and well-being of its people, the national security of its people. The many other issues are taken into consideration. And when we talk about our spanning alliances that goes across multiple continents, why would we choose a complete novice who has no relationships with any of the people that he's going to be working with around the globe, when his main skill is going and then they're making points, and then making big, quick, fast, clippable points for media? Make a press secretary. If you want to drive us wild as liberals or as the opposition, make a press secretary. Then we need to listen to his annoying, stupid voice every other day. Why make him Secretary of State? It makes no sense. Why is he on the short list for this position? Is it because he asked to be on it? I think that must be it. He must have asked to be on that short list. He must have asked to be on it. Because if there's somebody in Trump world thinking Secretary of State, former ambassador, senator, and then pharmaceutical TikTok businessman. I say TikTok businessman because, he's here for the quick quips. It's a terrible idea. It's a horrible idea. Keep him to a million miles away from the Secretary of State position. But I mean, the whole administration is filled with potential crazy picks that are being considered reportedly. For example, here's Kash Patel, who is reportedly being considered to be the next director of the Central Intelligence Agency on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast.
Criminal prosecutions. Kash, I know you're probably going to be head of the CIA, but do you believe that you can deliver the goods on this in a pretty short order the first couple of months so we can get rolling on prosecutions?
Yes, we got the bench for it, Bannon, and you know those guys. I'm not going to go out there and say their names right now so the radical left-wing media can terrorize them. But, excuse me, the one thing we learned in the Trump administration the first go-around is we got to put in all-America patriots top to bottom. And we got them for law enforcement. We got them for intel collection. We got them for offensive operations. We got them for DOD, CIA, everywhere. And the one thing we will do that they never will do is we will follow the facts and the law and go to courts of law and correct these justices and lawyers who have been prosecuting these cases based on politics and actually issuing them as lawfare. We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice. And Steve, this is why they hate us. This is why we're tyrannical. This is why we're dictators, because we're actually going to use the Constitution to prosecute them for crimes they said we have always been guilty of, but never have.
Wow. Really brave new ground here. We need to depoliticize the organization. How? By filling it completely with our politically loyal picks and then going after the media and opposition who oppose this. I think that's brilliant. I wish I thought of that sooner. Dylan, how do you explain the fact that under Obama, the Russians occupied Crimea and attacked eastern Ukraine? Trump came during his 4 years. There were less Ukrainians dying in the East than in car accidents. Biden came and the war began. How did that happen? Well, first off, I think Obama was weak on Ukraine. I'm not a fan of Obama on Ukraine. So I don't know what the Obama thing has to do with it. I guess the idea is to establish that the war didn't get worse under Trump. I mean, I can explain it through a few things. I think I can explain it through maybe Putin thought he could negotiate something that wouldn't necessitate force. And when that did not happen during the Trump term, and we went back to Biden, some gears started going back into motion that weren't in motion before. It could be that Putin was starting to get really older. You know, Putin's now 72 years old. And when you're getting up there and you're thinking about building your legacy and leaving something behind, you kind of have to finish your projects. And Putin has written for years that he believes that Ukraine is an extension of Russia. And if it does not exist as a state, as an extension of the Ruski Mir, of the Russian world, then it cannot exist at all. And so if he's getting older, the older he gets, the less opportunities he has to act on that. And the longer he takes, the more entrenched Ukrainian society becomes, the government becomes, and its military becomes, because after 2014, they started polishing some stuff up. I mean, there could be other stuff as well, but it's impossible to know all of the thinking from the Kremlin. Those are just like two ideas from off the top of my head. It's hard to really know the inner workings of the Kremlin, so I can't really give you their exact mindset as to why they invaded during the Biden era and didn't invade during the Trump era. As for like Trump like claiming like the lives or like he under Trump barely anybody died. It is true that while Trump was president for 4 years, you know, there was not an expansion of the war. The war continued as it was before, frozen and ready to ignite at, you know, any moment. But he did not expand it. But I don't really know how much credit he gets for that, because it's a question of when the crisis comes around. Because if that's the case, then do we give credit for example, like Bush not having the Russians invade under his administration? Do we give credit? It's a hard game to play, because you would have to evaluate and determine that the reason that the Russians didn't invade during Trump's era was not because they didn't feel that they weren't ready, or not because, the Putin was still felt he could do negotiation. You'd have to determine that it was just Trump's too crazy. If we invade under Trump, you know, something bad could happen. And I have not been able to see that been established. I've yet to see that be established. And I also don't think that Trump's been particularly that good on the issue. I don't think that he was good when it came to the sending of military aid to Ukraine during his term, when he unconstitutionally blocked aid to Ukraine. I don't think that sends the message that Ukraine aid particularly matters. I think it sends the message that as long as you can scratch my back, it matters. It's not of America's national interest. It's in my personal interest to get dirt on Hunter Biden. And so if it's no longer, at least from the Russian perspective, in the current administration's interest nationally to support Ukraine in this way, why would they think that Donald Trump would stick his neck out for Ukraine? If Donald Trump and the Republicans blocked aid for Ukraine during the Battle of Avdiivka, during really important battles, people died because of it. When Donald Trump's talking about ending sanctions on the Russians before he's even in the White House, he's talking about ending the war in 24 hours, you're shifting the leverage to the Russians. The timetable is on Trump, not Putin. The calls and signals of cutting aid was on Trump, not Putin. All of these red lines and like goals that Trump is setting, he's setting them for himself. But once January 21st comes around, you know, a clock starts ticking. And if the war is still going on in February or March, you know, people are going to ask questions about the 24-hour peace timetable. And if the Russians offer a deal that's not that great, will Freudian slip. Will Trump say no? Will Trump say no if he needs to? Part of being a good deal maker is knowing when to walk away. And the Russians have offered bad deal after bad deal before going back on said bad deals. So if that's what we're going to see again, is a pause of the fighting for 4 years before it reignites again, is that something that Trump should accept? I don't think so. Will he? I don't know. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that. I feel like I'm just repeating what I said earlier, but somebody came in here and asked, so. I will say there is one other positive sign we've gotten from the Trump administration, and that is one of Trump's cronies, Brian Lanza. He came out and he said that Crimea's lost. He came out, and as somebody who works in Trump world, he was like, look, guys, Crimea's lost. The Ukrainians are going to have to give up parts of eastern Ukraine and Crimea. It's already gone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he's making a big statement about it. I wonder if we've got a quote here in the article. No, we don't. We don't have a quote here. Here it is. He said the new administration priority in Ukraine would be establishing peace and not restoring lost territory. And if President Zelensky comes to the table and says, well, we can only have peace if we have Crimea, he shows to us that he is not serious. Crimea is gone. In response to this, the Trump campaign came out and tried to distance themselves from Brian Lanza. This is a quote from the Trump campaign team spokesperson. Brian Lanza was a contractor for the campaign. He does not work for President Trump, and he does not speak for him. This is the only distancing I've seen from Trump or his general organization around him from statements along the lines of give up land, cut the aid, cut the support. This is the only thing I've seen even close to that. Does this mean that Trump wants to take back Crimea? Not necessarily. It could mean that Trump is willing to make a deal where no territorial changes are officially recognized, but the line is frozen, and having calls like this that could anger the Ukrainians could upset that deal. And so maybe he wants to undercut it for that reason. Maybe it's a question of leverage. And if he gives up Crimea right off the bat in recognition of Crimea, or his staff is saying that, like, hey, Crimea's gone, without even negotiating it, then the Russians are coming to the table already with Crimea, and they don't need to exchange anything for it. And if Trump wants to get the best deal so he doesn't humiliate himself, he's going to want to have leverage. And being able to say recognition of Crimea or something along those lines, if the Ukrainians agreed to such a thing, of course he could do it without them, but that would come with much more problems. He's going to need some leverage of his own. And giving up Crimea before negotiations even started is not good deal making. It could be either of those things. What I would lean towards is probably the latter. There could be some other stuff that I don't know about, but I mean, this is of note. This is of note. And it at least tells me that they're at least taking the situation semi-seriously, and they're willing to at least tamper down on some of the craziness in the general Trump organization on the fringes. Now, if his son goes out there and says crazy stuff about Ukraine, now he can get off the hook on that. I don't know if you guys saw the messages that Donald Trump Jr. posted about Ukraine. 1 second, let me see if I can find it. Donald Trump Jr. Ukraine. He posted this video of Zelensky basically painting him as a welfare queen. Not exactly the best way to promote Ukrainian-American relations. Look at this. When you're 38 days from losing your allowance. You heard the song. I'm not going to play the whole thing for copyright reasons. But you can see money on him. He looks sad because he's, led his country through almost 3 years of brutal war. And he's mocking him because there's a good chance that Trump's going to cut off the spigot of American aid, and then more Ukrainian cities could fall. We could have more, more Buchas, more Ukrainian POWs get executed, less air defense interceptors to shoot down the drones that are ramming into its cities. And of course, that's funny. It's funny that the drones are not going to be shot down as they hit kindergartens. It's funny that the missiles that hit cancer wards are going to be able to do that uncontested. That's funny. It's funny that more Ukrainian POWs are likely to be captured, tortured, and or executed. It's funny that all these children that have been kidnapped from Ukraine and illegally smuggled into Russia might never be able to go home, because that's something that would have to be settled at the negotiating table. And if you don't have weapons, you don't have leverage. It's just so funny. It's just so funny. Why aren't you guys laughing? I don't see anybody laughing. It's just so funny. Mind you, he's the president's son, and I don't care, like, at the end of the day, what the kid thinks or the son thinks usually, or the aunt or the cousin or the whoever, because they're all family members, and family members are family members, and you can't really choose who comes out of you when you give birth or when you produce an offspring, and you can't really choose who you're born into the bloodline of. But Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump were reportedly voices in Trump's ear that whispered J.D. Vance's name when Trump was instead considering Doug Burgum, a much more traditional conservative pick that would have been seen as more likely to attract moderate voters. They instead pushed for J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance was the nominee. Now, mind you, that this isn't the only time they've pushed for something, and I'm sure they've pushed for something other times and have not succeeded, and it's not going to be Donald Trump Jr. or Eric Trump making policy. If Donald Trump says we're sending aid to Ukraine, these types of TikToks or Instagram messages, if negotiations go a certain way, are going to probably shut down real quick. But I do think that Donald Trump is not going to tell them to shut up if they want to say, here's my opinion on Ukraine. And I don't think that, and I think that's going to be the case with not only Eric Trump, not only Don Jr., but I think it's also going to be the case with Elon Musk, which is why, again, all these little pieces of tidbit BS pieces of information that they've picked up from social media over the years could actually end up having an impact. It was Elon who boosted all this crazy stuff about Springfield, and then what does Donald Trump say on the debate stage? I'm just saying, man, Twitter memes have much more power in the 21st century than I would prefer. Oh, by the way, about that Lanza guy who said that about Crimea, fun fact, let me read you this from CNN. A former senior campaign and transition aide to President Donald Trump recently inked a deal to help a Russian oligarch's conglomerate shed sanctions the Trump administration slapped on them last month. Brian Lanza, who is in regular contact with White House officials, is lobbying on behalf of the chairman of EN Plus Group, an energy and aluminum firm presently controlled by Oleg Dubryska, according to several sources. This person is a billionaire who is close to the Russian president and was a target of U.S. sanctions imposed last month. Man, that's fascinating. Probably coincidental. Also, I'm not a fan of Shushko. Okay, ignore this is from Shushko. I just pulled this up, this old speech from Ted Cruz, to just show you guys quickly. Like, when you listen to Marco Rubio or all these others that would have traditionally been 100% in the camp of Ukraine, if it wasn't for Donald Trump and this base turn against support largely motivated by the leaders of the MAGA movement, they've been the biggest vocal opponents of supporting Ukraine. If it wasn't for that, these guys would be 100% on board. If it was just about principle, just about philosophy, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, so many of these people would be 100% on board with Ukraine to the point that they'd be standing up to whatever administration. But powerful political positions and power is attractive. It is seductive, even seductive to your principles. And I just wanted to give you an example because I remember we talked so much time on this show about the Budapest Memorandum and history that's undercovered and not talked enough about by our politicians and by our media. But you know who else knows about the Budapest Memorandum and knows about all these things that give a background, that could give you the context as to why America might actually owe Ukraine something from when they gave up their atomic stockpiles. I'm not the only person who's been saying this. The people around Trump have been saying this. Ted Cruz have been saying this.
We have a formal obligation, a commitment the United States made to help the Ukrainians defend themselves. Why is that? Well, after Ukraine successfully declared independence from the USSR in 1991, the United States signed an agreement called the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assistance. The Budapest Memorandum, under the terms of it, Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear weapons. Ukraine had the third largest stockpile of nuclear weapons on the face of the planet. America agreed quite reasonably the world would be safer if Ukraine did not have nukes. And the brand new Ukrainian government agreed and gave up their nuclear weapons, making America safer and the world safer. But the Ukrainian government did not do so for nothing. It did so in exchange for explicit assurances that the United States would protect Ukraine's territorial integrity. Let me reiterate that. The United States made a formal commitment to the Ukrainians that if they gave up their nuclear weapons, we would help them protect themselves. And the Ukrainians are asking us to honor our commitment in the form, and they're very specific what they're asking, in the form of immediate sanctions on Nord Stream 2 and weapons so they can defend themselves. We need to send them that lethal aid. The kind of firepower the Ukrainians need to defend themselves, not the blankets and teddy bears and meals that the Obama administration sent the last time Russia invaded Ukraine.
And now they all sound like Obama. Now they all sound like Obama. Strange. Give me a moment here. Technical difficulties as always. I'm a boomer when it comes to this stuff. Absolutely. Boomer coded. Do.